we've been talking behind the scenes over the last week, getting ready. We have a format that we think is going to be pretty fun. And at some point soon, I'm going to figure out if I can actually share my screen in a way that works. But before we do that, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Thank everyone who has donated to the fundraiser. Obviously, you can see the link below. As much as we love to talk about baseball, that's why we're here. We're here to try to raise money for a great cause. So I want to turn it over to my co-hosts and let them introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. So why don't we start with Sara, and then we'll go to Frank.
Hey, y'all. Really excited to be here. Excited for this conversation. My name is Sara Sanchez. You can find my fantasy baseball content at Baseball HQ and as the co-host of the Fantasy Feud podcast at Pitcher List. And then if you're a Cubs type person, you know my Cubs writing over at bleedcubbyblue.com.
And I'm Frank Stampfl. I'm from the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast over at CBS Sports. Thanks again to Nick for putting this together. Obviously, every year it's great analysis, great people, obviously doing it for a great cause as well. So if you have the means, obviously, donate to ALS research here. But yes, happy to be here with you guys and talking normal baseball. This is the first time I've ever done power rankings by myself, and it actually turned out to be kind of tough to do. So I'm sure we'll talk it through, but it was a little bit harder than I thought.
Yeah, I'm used to doing fantasy panels, so this is kind of a fun change. But I'm Bret Sayre. I'm the president and CEO of Baseball Prospectus. I've been at BP a long time, doing fantasy stuff to non-fantasy stuff, and it's been a fun ride. I get to meet a lot of awesome people in the industry, both in the fantasy space and in the non-fantasy space. So I'm really excited for us to get going. So let's walk through exactly what we're going to do here. So our goal here at the end of this, 55 minutes is to try to come up with our initial 2025 MLB power rankings. We each have our own ideas going into this. We have not shared them with each other prior to this panel. And what we're going to do is we're going to treat it like a really weird snake draft. We're going to start at the top. We're going to start with Sara in a minute. We're going to start at the top, do 1, 2, and 3, and then we're going to snake and wrap around to the bottom and do 30, 29, and 28. We're going to keep going, toggling between the top and bottom until we fill out the middle. Once we fill out our initial consensus, we're going to talk about places where we might disagree the most and talk about teams that we think are most interesting. And then at the end, we'll take any questions anyone has.
They are willing to defer the amount of money that the Pittsburgh Pirates owner has, period, into the future. So the Dodgers with a bullet, number 1.
All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep. See it with the tiers, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Got it.
All right. So now that we have this up, I'm just before Frank goes for pick number 2. Let's go through the tiers. So we've got from the top to bottom, we've broken this out into 6 categories. First category is the Dodgers. Second category is division favorites. Third category is in the playoff mix. The fourth is a wild card if you squint. The fifth category is, look, we tried. And the sixth category is us, not so much. So with that, the Dodgers are in their own tier. So Frank, who do you want to lead off the division favorites tier at number 2?
Yeah, I think it's pretty wide open here for the number 2 team in the power rankings. I chose to go with the Phillies. I think they are a perennial contender. They have an extremely strong lineup, proven names in there. Obviously, Bryce Harper's and the Kyle Schwarbers, Nick Castellanos, guys like that. They added Max Kepler this offseason, who's not an amazing player, but, strong side platoon, could do some things in that ballpark. They have a great rotation headed by Zach Wheeler. They added Jesus Luzardo this offseason. So hoping Jesus Luzardo is healthy, the velocity bounces back for Luzardo this upcoming season. I would say the biggest question with their team is currently their bullpen. They added Jordan Romano, who is coming back from elbow surgery. They lost Jeff Hoffman. They lost Carlos Estevez as well. They do have some other names in case Jordan Romano doesn't work out. They have Matt Strahm, who's done it for a while. He's a great lefty. Orion Kirkering, who's maybe the closer of the future for the Phillies. But overall, I think number 2 team is wide open. I chose to go with the Phillies. I think this is kind of up for debate. But yeah, definitely think that they will be contending for the NL East title this season.
Yep, I think that's a good choice. So I am not going to go very far from a division standpoint for the number 3 team. And sadly, considering where I'm located, I don't like having to say this, but my next team up in the power rankings is the Braves. I think that, last year was certainly not the year they were looking for, but when you look at the talent on this roster, especially across the infield, you have Ron Acuna coming back at some point, probably in May. Last time he came back from a knee injury, he came back pretty strong. You have Spencer Strider coming back about a month into the season. So the Braves kind of start off as what I would consider to be a tier 3 team. But once you add those 2 guys to the mix that they already have, I think they become a really strong contender for the next best team in baseball behind the Dodgers. And what it does is it makes the NL East really fun. Because I assume at some point we will get to the Mets who have certainly remade their team a little bit, but Braves at 3, and then since this is a snake, I'm going to go next, and we're going to wrap right around to number 30. So this one is a kind of an interesting decision. I am going with the Colorado Rockies. So yes, the White Sox are coming off of just an absolutely abysmal season, one of the worst of all times. But I look at their roster versus the Rockies roster, and I think the Rockies just are absolutely terrible. They are, and we're going to have a little fun with this from time to time. We are releasing at Baseball Prospectus, we're releasing PECOTA tomorrow, which is always a fun day for us. But the Colorado Rockies are projected to have the 3rd worst season since the inception of PECOTA in 2025. So the only 2 teams that have ever been projected for worse seasons than the Rockies, who we are projecting to lose 107 games, which for a projection system, that is incredible. It's the 2003 Tigers and the 2004 Devil Rays. And that's it. That's the list. If you're paying attention, watching the stream, I dare you to try to name 5 players on the 2025 Colorado Rockies. Well, just try. And then with that, let's turn it back over to Frank for number 29.
So I will take the low-hanging fruit of the Chicago White Sox, who are coming off the single-season record for most losses ever in the sport, 121 losses for the White Sox last season. Not much room, obviously, for optimism in 2025. But if you're a White Sox fan, I do want to offer some hope, because the farm system, a couple of years down the line, I could see talent developing here. So they have a couple of catchers in Kyle Teal and Edgar Caro. They have Colson Montgomery, who they're hoping to bounce back. He did look much better in the Arizona Fall League, obviously in a really small sample size. They traded for Braden Montgomery in the Garrett Crochet deal. They also have some pitchers that are supposed to be really exciting lefties, Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith. So further down the line, I think it's going to be a really rough season again in 2025. I think the betting line for regular season wins 52.5 for the White Sox. So that just gives you an expectation of, how bad they truly are going to be this upcoming season. But, hopefully 2, 3, 4 years down the line, the White Sox do start to get things back on track.
All right, Sarah, up to you. 28.
Yeah. I also still in this tier for me, and there were only 3 teams in this tier for me, just to kind of spoiler alert this one. It's the Miami Marlins, and I just don't even know what's going on in Miami. They had something approximating a plan when Kanang was there, And they made the playoffs, like in the shocking run where they were just really good in one-run games and really kind of stunned everybody. And then they have moved off of that. If you look at the names of guys who are going to be in starting roles for the Marlins at this point in time, it's just not all that compelling. They did manage to get a little bit of talent from the Orioles with a trade last season. Connor Norby, Kyle Stowers. It's like, these are not guys you build an entire franchise around. Got Jonah Bride starting right now, and maybe Davison De Los Santos is kind of interesting at first base. You got Matt Mervis from the Cubs for Vidal Brujan, which I actually sort of like for Matt Mervis with a change in scenery. But if you're as the Chicago Cubs know, if you were pinning your hopes on Matt Mervis to turn around your fortunes, this is probably not going to work out well for you. There are some exciting young pitchers in Miami, so I do think Miami is a more interesting team to watch than either the Rockies or the White Sox, who you both already talked about. But I think the Marlins are the last team in the sort of what are we doing here territory.
All right, sounds great. So let's flip it back around to the top, and Sara, you're back on for team number 4.
Yeah, this is actually 4 is actually kind of tricky here. Y'all took 2 of my favorites there earlier, but I'm going to go with the Baltimore Orioles. I think that the Orioles have a core that is just super interesting. I'm not entirely sure what to expect from Jackson Holliday, but I believe in scouting, and I believe in the ability of people to see talent, and you don't really become like an overall number 1 draft pick and an overall number 1 prospect. And even with his struggles last year, like I see a bounce back coming there. However, it's not just Jackson Holliday, right? Like they've got some really talented guys with Jordan Westberg. Gunnar Henderson might be one of my favorite players to watch, and Adley Rutschman might be the best catcher in baseball, not named William Contreras. So I am all in on this Orioles team. I wish they had done a little bit more with pitching in the offseason, but outside of that flaw, which we'll see where it gets them, I think this Orioles team is stacked, and I think they're going to make a real run at the AL East.
All right, Frank, you're up for 5.
Yeah, the Orioles were a tough team for me to rank. I just really wish that they went out and got a top tier starting pitcher, whether it was bringing back Burns or signing up Blake Snell. They could still trade for Dylan Cease. I guess we'll see if they could do that. As the Yankee fan, I didn't want to choose the Yankees, but here we are, and I am going to choose the Yankees here. They won the AL pennant last year, obviously lost in the World Series, kicked the ball around, dropped the ball, as we all saw on primetime television, unfortunately, and they lost the Juan Soto sweepstakes this offseason to the New York Mets. My heart is broken, obviously, but I thought that their plan B was solid. I'm not going to go as far as to say like it was amazing. This was the best plan B that they could have done. I thought that they overpaid Max Fried, but he is a really good number 2 starting pitcher when he's healthy, of course. They traded for Devin Williams, who is one of the best closers in baseball when he's healthy, of course. They traded for Cody Bellinger, whose swing I think will work out quite well in Yankee Stadium. And then they signed Paul Goldschmidt to a 1-year deal, hoping that once what we saw in the second half is closer to the player that we'll see from Paul Goldschmidt here in 2025. So I think that their pivot, their plan B was okay. I think on paper, the rotation looks great. You need Garrett Cole to stay healthy, which is a big question. They have obviously some age in the lineup as well, like Stanton. You need him to stay healthy, Goldschmidt as well. I think the bullpen could be one of the best in baseball. You've got Luke Weaver and Devin Williams on the back end there, kind of closing things out. So overall, I think they'll be a really good team once again. I think the AL is obviously a little bit more wide open than the NL is right now. But yeah, we'll go with the Yankees here and in that same tier with the Orioles.
Sounds good. All right, so I'm going to mildly step on some toes in this room, and we can get into a little more detail later. But I'm going to take the Cubs here at 6. I think that the trade for Kyle Tucker really kind of it sets a tone, but it also really fills a very large hole there. And all of a sudden the lineup really becomes significantly more formidable with Tucker in it. You've got Suzuki already there. You've got Michael Busch, who I really like to have a strong season. As a Mets fan, I am sad to watch Pete Armstrong patrol center at Wrigley because I think he is special out there. And I think the pitching staff is just good enough to put them in this spot. Although, the back end of that rotation is they're really going to need to find some group of, 2 or 3 guys from the depth that they have, but the depth is really strong. I like the trade for Ryan Presley. Ryan Presley's really good. Pair him with Hodge, and you get a really nice back end of that bullpen. So I'm gonna go with them at 6, and then as we wrap around, I am going to put the Nationals at 27. To me, this is a really big cluster down here at like 27 to about 22. And while I do really like the way that the Nationals are starting to position themselves from a long-term standpoint, the pitching is just going to be a real problem. I think James Wood is going to be a bright spot. I think Dylan Cruz is going to be a bright spot. Jacob Young plays the heck out of center field. And the rest of the team is, kind of average at best around. But I think the pitching is going to be tough. I think they're going to play a lot of reasonably high scoring games, and they're not going to come out on the right side of them. But ultimately, I think the Nationals will struggle to get to about 70 wins. So let's go up from the bottom of the ladder back to Frank for number 26.
Yeah, so I'll go with the Angels here, who made some early offseason moves. They, signed Yusei Kikuchi. They signed Travis d'Arnaud. They traded for Jorge Soler. The lineup maybe could be decent, but there is a lot of injury risk there. Obviously, Mike Trout had meniscus surgery twice on the same knee last season. Zach Neto is coming back from shoulder surgery. Doesn't sound like he'll be ready for opening day. So you need both of those two to get healthy and then stay healthy, just for this lineup to just be solid, I would say. Kikuchi, I think a nice addition, and most teams would like to have him as their number 3 or number 4, but not as their number 1. So this is just still a very talent deficient roster. The same thing I said about the White Sox. I'll say something similar for the Angels. They do have some prospects that I'm excited to see at some point this season, with like a Christian Moore or a Caden Dana, but I just don't think those guys will be impactful enough for this team to even sniff a wild card or anywhere close to a playoff spot. So the Angels are bottom dwellers once again. I would actually have them in all the way on the bottom tier, but if you want to leave them in that same tier with the Nationals, that's totally fine.
All right, we can get into a debate about where that is. For me, I would put the Nationals in that group. So we'll see what the end result looks like. So back to Sara for number 25.
Yeah, for me, it is the Athletics. And, I hope John Fisher never gets a good night's sleep again for what he has done for to this team. I actually think the Athletics is currently constructed have a fatal flaw, and that is that they don't have good enough pitching for the park that they're going to be playing in. Sacramento is not one of these PCL launching pad type of parks, but it is going to play different than the Coliseum. And one of the things that guys are going to figure out real fast is that they don't have the type of foul territory they used to have for pop outs and the like. This pitching staff just doesn't inspire a ton of confidence to me, and it certainly doesn't inspire a ton of confidence if it's not pitching in the Coliseum. So, you've got, they signed Luis Severino, JP Sears. I do like Jeffrey Springs a lot, but he's hurt all the time, so I really don't know what that's going to look like. And then it's a bunch of names that truly I haven't drafted in really any draft, and I doubt most people who are watching this have been drafting. So I think the pitching is fatal flaw for the Athletics, and I think that they are going to be at the very bottom of the AL West, hanging out there with the Angels. I honestly am kind of torn as to whether I think the Athletics or the Angels are going to be the worst team in that division.
All right. So then who do you have at number 7?
Yeah, so this is interesting because I actually would put this in the second tier as well, and it's the Mets. And it's interesting to have 3 of the NL East teams all in that could win the division category, but I think they all could. You go out, you add Juan Soto. That is huge for Queens. I absolutely love that for the Mets. That's a park that is really a nice pitcher's park. They've still got Francisco Lindor in his prime. We got to see what MVP candidate Lindor looked like there last year. And they're getting a guy back who I think people should keep an eye on. Ronnie Mauricio was on like a 2020 pace when he tore his when he showed his first rookie campaign, and then he tore his ACL in the Dominican Winter League last year. And we didn't really get to see him, but I think that Ronnie Mauricio is going to be an impact bat for the Mets. They're actually going to have a really crowded infield situation there. And so I think the Mets, Phillies, and Braves are all going to duke it out for that division lead. It's going to be a really fun division. And just one note on, Bret, I love where you put the Cubs. You believe more in the Cubs than I do at this moment in time. But one of the things I struggled with this exercise, I believe the Cubs are going to win that division. I just don't think the Cubs are as good as the Phillies, Mets, or Braves. Like, I don't think they would win the NL East. And so that was really, divisional strength was one of those places where I struggled a bit with this exercise.
All right. All right, Frank, who do you got at number 8?
Yeah, I think that's a good call, Sarah, because I have the Cubs as my highest ranked NL Central team, but they weren't even inside my top 10, where I think I have like 3 NL East teams in my top 6. So it just goes back to what you were saying about the strength of that division. Next up for me is the Houston Astros. Despite losing some big names this offseason, they traded away Kyle Tucker and Ryan Presley. They lost Yusei Kikuchi to the Angels in free agency, but I did like their pivot away from Kyle Tucker. Once they traded him over to the Cubs, they brought Isaac Paredes back in that trade, and his swing is just a match made in heaven playing in Houston, right? There's that short portion left field, the Crawford boxes. He pulls everything. He hits the ball in the air. Doesn't hit it hard, but he should hit it hard enough just to sneak some home runs out there. And I think Paredes can honestly provide a stat line similar to what we've got from Bregman the past couple of years, 260, 25-ish home runs. So I like that addition. I also like, signing Christian Walker, who I think is one of the better first basemen in all of baseball. He's great defensively. He's got a lot of power. Again, it's a good ballpark for his swing. So I just like the pivot that they made. And, even with the lineup as is, the bottom half of it, there are definitely some question marks. But, the top 5 or 6, very, very solid. And if the Astros get any kind of contributions from like a Zach DeZenzo or Shea Whitcomb or Jacob Melton, something like that, then I think this lineup could be even better. And the rotation looks solid. Once again, Framber Valdez is playing for a contract this year. They got breakout seasons from Hunter Brown and Ronel Blanco last year. I think Spencer Arrighetti takes a big step forward this season as well. And they still have one of the best closers in baseball with Josh Hader. So I understand people might say, oh, well, they lost Kyle Tucker. Can you rank them this high? The answer for me is yes.
All right, so I'm going to jump in at 9 with a team that I was actually considering at 6 when I selected the Cubs, and that is going to be the Texas Rangers. So I'm going to put them in this. I'm going to put them in this tier, and we can certainly debate that later. But they're, Corey Seager is a star. He needs to stay on the field. He stays on the field most of the time. But Wyatt Langford, I think, is going to really show why he was such a hyped prospect this year and take another step forward off of what he did in 2024. And then you've got a group of really solid players behind that. You've got Marcus Semien, who is just a constant cog in that lineup. I really, really like the Jock Peterson signing. He was extremely good last year against right-handed pitching. He fits really well in that lineup. I've always been a big Jake Berger guy. He helps kind of flip the lineup a little bit against left-handers. And then you have a couple of really big question marks here, and like question marks that are, kind of 10-win swings in either direction, not per individual player, but on offense, you've got Evan Carter and Josh Young, and they've both had significant injury issues. They are both coming into spring training supposedly healthy. Carter and Young could be really solid building blocks for that team. And if they're able to stay on the field and do what they're capable of, this lineup looks extremely deep. And then on the mound, it's Jacob deGrom. I mean, what do you get out of a late 30s Jacob deGrom? He looked really good when he was back last year in his brief appearances. And if he's the guy they were hoping to get when they signed him to that contract, he's their ace, and everything kind of trickles down from there. You've got Tyler Malik coming back. You've got Kumar Rocker in the wings. It could be a very interesting pitching staff too. The bullpen's got question marks, but so do a lot of these teams at this point. And then flipping that around to the bottom, I am going to go with the Reds next at 24. So I am going to put them in. I think they kind of start this next category because I could see a scenario where they could reasonably contend for a wild card, but their team right now is I like to say it's a little bit more fun than talented. Ellie De La Cruz is probably the most fun player in baseball, but he can't carry this team by himself. Hunter Green is really fun to watch, but I don't think his results will always line up with the quality of his raw stuff. They're relying on other players that are very questionable in the rotation. Can Nick Lodolo stay healthy? What does Brady Singer look like out of Kauffman Stadium? Is Nick Martinez a legitimate major league starting pitcher? And then the lineup is a bunch of guys who, should be getting playing time for second division teams, but does the bulk of them add up to a lineup that can actually contend for a playoff spot? Ultimately, I think the answer is no. Adding Gavin Lux doesn't really help with this because he falls right into there. Matt McLain coming back and reestablishing himself as the 2023 version of him would go a long way to help push them towards 500 or potentially above. But there's just too many question marks on this team for me to put them any higher. Frank at 23.
Yeah, let's stick in the National League Central. I'm going to go with the Cardinals. Kind of feels like they're just stuck in between right now. They let Paul Goldschmidt walk in the offseason. Sounded like they wanted to shed payroll, something they have not done yet. They tried to trade away Nolan Arenado to the Astros. He voided that deal, and they haven't traded away anyone else. I mean, we've heard rumors of Sonny Gray, Eric Fetty, Ryan Helsley, but they haven't made moves yet. Maybe if they're out of it by the deadline, those are players that they're looking to move. I do think that they have some interesting young bats that I'm, want to see how they develop and what they do this upcoming season. Guys like Mason Wynn and Jordan Walker, Ivan Herrera, Victor Scott. Can they get anything out of the bat from Victor Scott there? Wilson Contreras, I think moving from catcher to first base is a great move for him. I think it's a great move for fantasy as well. He's dealt with a lot of injuries. So, getting him up out of that crouching position at first base, hopefully helps him stay healthy. I think he's awesome for fantasy this year, by the way, too. And the rotation is okay. I actually think they have really strong depth. I think they go about like 8 or 9 deep that could contribute this season. They've got some prospects and then they got some veterans and some prospects, Quinn Matthews, Tink Hence, Michael McGreevy, where if they start to trade those guys off or injuries inevitably happen, they could be there to fill the void. It's just, what's the motivation? What is this team actually trying to do? I don't know. And that's kind of confusing for me. So the Cardinals is the next team up for me. And I think a similar tier as the Reds makes sense.
All right. Sarah?
Yeah, so this is my team to struggle, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to stay in the NL Central, and I'm going to go with the Pirates. And I hate doing this because the Pirates have some really interesting starting pitching that I believe in a lot. I love Paul Skeens. I'm really interested in what Jared Jones flashed last year. I think Bubba Chandler is my most rostered, like late round, take a flyer on a rookie type of pitcher at this moment in time. And also, I just don't know what they're doing with the lineup around this pitching core to win baseball games. There's a real, this goes back to what I was saying about the NL Central. I think the NL Central is kind of top heavy with the Cubs and Brewers up there. And then it's really bottom heavy as well with 3 teams that can't quite put together a coherent, this is what we're doing and this is where we're going. I don't know if they're going to finally get something out of some of their catcher picks that they had made over the last couple of years, Henry Davis, Endy Rodriguez. I really am not all that optimistic about it. And frankly, and this is such a tiny little detail, but it's the type of detail you get right when things are going right. And it's the type of detail you get wrong when things are going wrong. Seeing them misspell Andrew McCutcheon's name at their fan fest just really grated me in all the wrong ways. That is your franchise dude for the last decade. And you can't even bother to spell his name right. for the fans. So I'm not sure what's going on in Pittsburgh, but I would put them as in that same tier with the Cardinals and the Reds.
All right, so then back up to the top part of the list for your number 10.
Yeah, and this actually starts the next tier for me as well. I actually probably would have started it with the Astros and the Rangers, but so we're in the blue one here. That is going to be the Arizona Diamondbacks for me. I love what the Arizona Diamondbacks have done this offseason so far. I think that's a really that's a talented team, and the biggest question mark for me with them last year was really what are you going to get out of Corbin Carroll? We saw, I think, the worst from Corbin Carroll, and we also saw the best from Corbin Carroll last year. If he's who he was at the end of the season rather than at the start of the season, I think that the Diamondbacks are in really good space here. But adding Corbin Burns to the top of that rotation, that's the type of move you make when you are in on the talent you have. It's exactly the opposite of what the Pirates are doing. And I love what the Diamondbacks did with that move. I think Gabriel Moreno is a really good young catcher. I think they've got some talented outfielders there. And Ketel Marte shows no signs of slowing down. So the Diamondbacks are probably the next best team for me.
All right, Frank for 11.
Yeah, I love that call on the Diamondbacks. I'm going to stick in the NL West here now and go to the Padres. And people might be, shocked to hear us take this long to mention the Padres name. I think they have a really talented roster, but I am just scared off by this ownership dispute that's happening right now between Peter Seidler's widow and Peter Seidler's brothers. Behind the scenes, it's kind of a mess. It could be part of the reason why they missed out on Roki Sasaki. I mean, to be honest, he probably was going to go to the Dodgers no matter what. But it's the vibes are off heading into 2025 for the Padres. And, we've heard that they're shopping names like Dylan Cease and Michael King and Robert Suarez, Luis Arraez. They've already lost Tanner Scott this offseason, Jurickson Profar, who went to the Braves. Ha-Sung Kim recently signed with the Tampa Bay Rays. So they're missing out on talent. Sounds like they're trying to ship out some more talent, but they still have a lot left. You look on the high end, they have Tatis, they have Machado, they have Jackson Merrill, and Xander Bogaerts, hopefully if he can stay healthy, will bounce back. For now, they have Dylan Cease, they have Michael King, they have Yu Darvish. I think that they are lacking depth both in their lineup and in their rotation. The team as is right now, but will this be the team on opening day? Will they figure out whatever's going on behind the scenes? I like the top end talent, but I do have some pretty big questions here with the Padres.
All right. So for number 12, I am going to flip back over to the American League, and I am going to go with the Twins here. I think there's a lot of very interesting talent on the Twins, and yes, this means this is unless I'm missing someone, this is the last division now to be represented in our exercise so far, either at the top or at the bottom, which probably says a lot about this division. So I take that back. The White Sox. Do the White Sox really count as being in the AL Central?
Nah.
I think the White Sox might need to be relegated, honestly.
Yeah. So the Twins have a lot of really fun pieces, and there's a lot of variability here. Anytime you have a team with someone as talented and injury prone as Byron Buxton, you just get a lot of variability there. Add Carlos Correa in the mix, who is similar, then add Royce Lewis, and if you told me that all three of those guys were going to get 500 plate appearances on the season, I would think that the Twins would run away with the AL Central. But the odds of that happening are not very large. The rotation is pretty solid there. Pablo Lopez is very underrated in my opinion. I think he makes for a really great kind of ace at the top of that rotation. He's not, you're never going to, mistake him for the best pitcher in baseball, but he is absolutely good enough to be the ace of a contending team. The bullpen is very strong. You get back, you not only have Yohan Duran, you get Brock Stewart back, who was very good before his shoulder injury. If he bounces back, that's a great 7th, 8th inning option there to bridge. You've got other guys who are either in the process of breaking out or who could break out. Matt Wallner was really impressive last year. Can he continue that? Can Trevor Larnach kind of have a similar to Matt Wallner type breakout? Is Brooks Lee the prospect we thought he was? There's a lot of questions that need to go answered. But even if some of those questions go very wrong, there's enough raw talent on that roster to contend for that division mix anyway. And I have them here at number 12. So then going back down to the bottom, I am going to I'm going to make what's probably a pretty unpopular pick here. I'm going to take the Detroit Tigers. They were a great story last year, and I don't want to take away anything from that. Tariq Skubal is one of the most fun pitchers in baseball to watch, but the entire team behind him is rough for a playoff contender. Riley Green looks like he's establishing himself as an above average starter, which they desperately need. Is Kerry Carpenter a legitimate middle of the lineup bat that they can rely on? Does Gleyber Torres have anything left? He has been inconsistent at best. You've got Colt Keith, who we don't quite know what we're going to get out of. Their bullpen is pretty. It's not bad for a wild card contending team, but their best reliever right now is Tommy Conley, and he's good for probably about 30 to 40 innings. Behind Tariq Skubal, there's just not a ton. Can Alex Cobb stay healthy? Is Jackson Jobe going to produce what prospect mavens think he's going to produce? I don't feel there's some similar questions to the Tigers as there are to the Twins. I just don't feel very good about their overall talent level. So from there, let's go. Let's sticking at the bottom. We're up to, I believe, number 19. If I'm counting right, maybe 20. I think number 20.
Yeah, I'm going to have the Blue Jays here. They struck out on Ohtani last season. They struck out on Juan Soto and Roki Sasaki this offseason. They still have spent some money. They brought in Anthony Santander, Jeff Hoffman to be their closer. They brought in Max Scherzer just last week. Andres Jimenez obviously should help their defense quite a bit. And the Vlad Jr. extension is the biggest topic of conversation right now for the Blue Jays, and maybe the biggest talking point the rest of this offseason too, because if he doesn't get an extension done by opening day, he's likely to hit free agency next offseason. So, an offseason with Vlad Jr. and Kyle Tucker would be a pretty crazy one next year. We'll see what your Cubbies do, Sara, with Kyle Tucker. But for the Blue Jays, solid team on paper. I think they really need a bounce back season from Bo Bichette. I kind of feel like he is the catalyst. He's like in the middle of all of this, where if he can get back to the player he was before, then maybe their lineup actually could be above average with Vlad Jr. and Santander. And if Bichette can hit 280 with 20 to 25 home runs, something like that, obviously that would be a huge boost for them. Rotation isn't amazing, but I still think they have some serviceable names. Gausman kind of looks like he's starting to trend downwards. Jose Barrios, solid like he always is. Bassett also might be trending down. Scherzer, still okay last year, but how many starts are you going to get? Like, he's obviously 40 years old now. And Bowden Francis, who I'm pretty interested by, the final 2 months was the best pitcher in baseball. So, maybe a sleeper in fantasy baseball leagues this year. And as I mentioned, they signed Jeff Hoffman to kind of head their bullpen and be their closer. I think that's actually a really good signing, assuming that he's healthy. I think if everything breaks right and Bo Bichette is healthy, they could compete for a wild card spot potentially. But yeah, that's only if everything breaks right. So we'll see if that happens for the Blue Jays.
All right, Sara, on to you.
Yeah, so my next players in the bottom tier, or my next team in the bottom tier, is the San Francisco Giants. And to be clear, I think we're in like the middle ranges here, where there's not a lot that distinguishes some of these teams from each other in both of the tiers that we're in. But with the Giants, the thing that I'm looking at that I'm really just worried about is pitching. After Logan Webb, you've got a pretty big question mark with who Robbie Ray is going to be in that rotation. It doesn't get much deeper after that. And then the relief corps, they had so many problems with Camilo Duvall last season. Ryan Walker was great stepping into that role, but is Ryan Walker really a closer? I'm not entirely sure about that. And then just a couple of questions on the hitting side too. I mean, I love the signing for Willy Adames. Like, I think I'm glad that They've got Buster Posey making calls to like go out and pay players. And also, I am not sure what happens to Willy Adames in that park. I would not be surprised at all to see him fall back a little bit. We already know he's kind of sensitive to where he's playing his games, right? Like he just was not the same hitter in Tampa Bay that he was in Milwaukee. And so when you look at a park like that, you sort of I'm a little worried about that particular park effect. There's just something about this Giants team feels like it's missing some pieces, and that would be my next lowest team.
All right, now back up to the top for you, number 13.
Yeah, speaking of Willy Adames, I'm going to give the Rays some love here for a couple of reasons. I kind of like the moves that the Rays have been making this offseason, and they seem to always, always, always punch above their weight. I see no reason that Yandy Diaz is going to fall off. I'm also real interested in Jonathan Aranda's bat there. At the risk of becoming a caricature of myself, I think Christopher Morel had probably the least lucky hitting season that I've ever seen from anyone last year. And he did not hit well in the Trop, but he doesn't have to hit in the Trop anymore. He gets to hit in Steinbrenner Park. And I would not be surprised at all if he just started the season on a tear and showed us some of that like 35 home run power that he has. I love the signing for Ha-Seong Kim. I like the pitching over here, although I do have a little bit of the same worry about the park change with the Rays pitchers that I did with the Athletic pitchers earlier, just because there are some sort of home away splits for a lot of these guys that I worry about. They should be getting Shane McClanahan back. Love Shane Baz, like Brian Pepio. I think that this Rays team is once again going to be in the mix in the AL East. That's my next team.
All right, Frank, number 14.
Yeah, we'll stay in the AL East, and this actually pains me to talk good about the Boston Red Sox, but I'll do it anyway for the sake of this exercise. Made some moves to upgrade their pitching staff this offseason. Hopefully, they acquired their ace of the future in Garrett Crochet. Looked like one of the best pitchers in baseball on a per-inning basis last season. Now, can he do it over the course of a full season? I think is one of the biggest questions in 2025. They also signed Walker Buehler. Does he have anything left? Is there a bounce back? He obviously looked much better in the postseason, closing out the World Series. They brought in Aroldis Chapman to compete for saves there. Do they get anything from Liam Hendriks? Obviously rooting for him. He's been through so much, but we haven't seen him pitch in an effective way in 2, 3, 4 years for Liam Hendriks. So some questions there in the bullpen. I think their lineup is solid. I think some help is on the way. Obviously, they have 3 of the top prospects in all of baseball with Roman Anthony, Christian Campbell, and Marcelo Meyer. I think Campbell is the most likely to be on the opening day roster of those 3. I feel like the rotation could have used maybe one more elite name up top this offseason, but again, they've got some depth. Maybe a Giolito comes back and can kind of return to form. Patrick Sandoval will be back some point this season. So I think it's an okay team. It's like maybe if everything works out, they can win 85 plus games this year. But yeah, Boston Red Sox was next up for me.
All right, so I'm going to go with 15. Now this is I'm actually going to pick the team that is projected the worst by PECOTA of the remaining 4 teams to be on the top. And this is more of an organizational statement than anything else, but I'm going to go with the Milwaukee Brewers. I think that the struggles that the Brewers will have this season are going to be pitching related, but I think they have earned enough rope from an org standpoint that they can patch together enough of a rotation in front of what's shaping up to be a very, very strong defense to keep enough runs on the board to let the offense play. And the offense is going to be led by two guys who I think are real superstars in Jackson Chourio and William Contreras. There's some question marks behind them, but there's also some players who, like I said, play really good defense. You've got Bryce Terang and Joey Ortiz, who probably won't contribute a ton on offense, but are really strong in the field. Garrett Mitchell is a very good center fielder with a little bit of offensive upside. I've always kind of been very interested by him from a fantasy standpoint. We'll see what he does with what should be a lot more run this season. And then who knows what you get with some of the older guys like Christian Yelich and Rhys Hoskins. There's there's the potential for them to kind of swing their way into a lot of impact there. So I'm going to go with the Brewers at 15, and then I am going to turn around and go with the Royals here at number, I guess that makes this a 19. The counting is the hardest part of doing the tiers this way. But the Royals have basically the opposite problem, which is their pitching shapes up to be really strong behind Reagans and Lugo. They've got Waka there. Michael Lorenzen was an interesting signing. I think he gives them a lot of innings at a pretty decent clip. But outside of Bobby Witt Jr., I do not know where their offense is going to come from. Sal Perez is a year older. Who knows what you get with Vinny Pasquantino? There's just not much there. I think this is a team that is just going to lose a whole lot of 3-2 games. And if they make it through the gauntlet and get into the playoffs, they have the pitching to make things interesting, as we saw in 2024. But I think it's going to be a tough road for them. Mm-hmm. And back to Frank.
Yeah, you mentioned a lack of offense with the Royals. I think that's a similar theme for the Seattle Mariners. They have one of, if not the best rotation in all of baseball, but they need more offense. They needed to do that this offseason. They just refuse to spend money. So their rotation is ridiculous. I think it should continue to be so. They have Logan Gilbert, Luis Castillo, George Kirby, Bryce Miller, and Brian Wu. All 5 are being drafted inside the top 40 starting pitchers in fantasy right now. So that just gives you, an idea of just how good they really are. And the lineup has a star in Julio Rodriguez. They also need that star to be more consistent. There have been lots of monthly splits, issues where he gets off to a slow start or just these really, really big slumps from Julio Rodriguez. It is a really tough park to hit in, obviously. So that could be part of the problem for him. They need a bounce back season from Randy Arozarena. But like I said, I think they really needed to be in on a big bat this offseason, whether that was trading away one of their pitchers from a position of strength to bring in a hitter, or even sign or be interested in a Pete Alonso or someone like that, Anthony Santander. It sounded like they were never even close on any of those free agents. So, I think the Mariners could be good, but they need some offensive upgrades on their team.
All right. Now, congratulations, Sara. You get to talk about the Cleveland Guardians.
Amazing. I love how I got to kick us off and I get to bring us home. I mean, this Guardians team really overperformed last season, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if they leapfrog a handful of the teams that we've already talked about again. But to do that, a bunch of things had to go right. For starters, they got a boost in their home park just from the way they rearranged some of those decks out there and some of those and some of the wind tunnels shifting. If that is sticky, then this is an offense that is probably better than we're giving it credit for. I mean, Jose Ramirez is still an absolute star, and you should expect him to do Jose Ramirez things, and it's a joy to watch. But a couple of guys really got a boost offensively last year just from the park. And I think that Stephen Kwan played a little bit higher offensively than we thought that he would. Lane Thomas was a really nice fit there. So they have some interesting young bats as well. Kyle Manzardo. I think that there's a possibility that we see Travis Bazzana this year. I drafted him in the first pitch rookie league, and he's a guy who I think you could see come up in sort of that accelerated rookie class that has been going on. The pitching here is solid. Tanner Bybee's really good. The Guardians are good at developing starting pitchers, so this is a place where I think the Guardians will continue to thrive. The one maybe question mark for me is in the bullpen, where we saw some Emmanuel Clase both looked like himself last year, and then in the playoffs absolutely did not look like himself. And if Emmanuel Clase starts to falter, they're going to have to look into that depth to find some guys who can close. I do like that they have Paul Sewald there at the moment. I like that Cade Smith is there. But, if Emmanuel Clase falters, that could be a problem for the Guardians. But I think they are exactly where they should be here, middle of the pack, and would not surprise me at all if they leapfrogged a few teams and made another statement in the AL Central, which is probably, I don't know about y'all, it was probably the weakest division in baseball for me, with the NL Central close behind.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. So it turns out we don't have 15 to 20 minutes to debate this. We do have about 6. So we started this off as a snake. So why don't we each go around and say the one team here that we that we think either has a potential to be a lot higher than they are on this consolidated list or a lot lower. So, Sara, you want to start us off with a team that you think is either more or less interesting than we've put together?
Yeah, sure. The team that I am more interested in, and I admit that I agreed with everything you said earlier about their pitching. It's the Washington Nationals. I think that offense has some serious potential. I think that James Wood is the real deal, and I think Dylan Cruz could be as well. They've got some interesting bats there, and so the question is, can the pitching step up? DJ Hertz was a lot better than I thought he would be last year, and I got to watch a little bit of DJ Hertz in the minors for the Cubs. He was better there as well. That changeup really does play. If that continues to play, then he could be like a solid number, like SP3 type of guy. Cade Cavalli, they have been babying him on the recovery with that with his arm injuries for the last couple of seasons. But if Cade Cavalli comes back and is what the Nationals thought he was going to be, that could be a huge boon for them. And then you get into the question of like, are they going to go out and try to acquire pitching at the deadline if it looks like they can actually play? And they're maybe like one starting pitcher away from being super interesting with some talent to trade. So I think while I agree with where the Nationals are at this moment in time, it would not shock me at all if they jumped a couple of tiers and were right in the mix in that NL East.
All right, that's a fun one. All right, Frank, what about you?
Yeah, I think we're in agreement there, Sara. I kind of look at the Nats as maybe everyone's like exciting team to maybe surprise, and if everything goes right, then they can compete for a wild card spot. I mean, you're absolutely right about the pitching. I don't have high expectations there, but if all of these young bats take a step forward together, I mean, yeah, I think their lineup could be pretty dangerous. So I think more so from a fun perspective, just excited to see where the Nationals go from here. It's obviously a really tough division to play in the NL East. I think a team that I would be a little bit lower on is the Tampa Bay Rays, and it's hard because when it feels like whenever you doubt them, that's when they come through and they come back and win 90 games. But I just don't know, playing their games in a minor league stadium this year in George Steinbrenner Field. I do think that that's going to help offense. I think that's going to hurt their pitchers, and their schedule as a result of this is really weird. It's really front loaded. I think they're playing 47 of their first 59 games at home because they don't want them playing, at home in the summer months when it's going to be raining in Florida basically every single day. So the back half of the season could really become a slog for the Rays, where they're on the road all the time. And I just wonder if that kind of battle of attrition is going to add up as the season goes on. So I think I'm a little bit lower on Tampa Bay and maybe a little bit more excited about the Nationals.
All right, sounds good. I'm going to talk about the Houston Astros because I'm a little lower on the Astros than I think a lot of people. I think there's just a lot of players that the Astros are relying on here who are either not established enough or are about to turn the corner into over the hill. I don't think the next couple of years are going to go well for Jose Altuve. He's already an atrocious second baseman. The talk of them playing him in left field is a little alarming. I think that there's, I did really like the Christian Walker signing. I think he's going to put up some really good numbers in that ballpark. And Jordan Alvarez is also obviously is a star at the plate. But you're relying on other guys as well, like guys like Jake Myers, who did solid defensively, but can he contribute with the bat? Isaac Paredes should be pretty good in that ballpark, but he also doesn't have the upside that some of these other guys have, and I think they're going to miss Alex Bregman there. Jeremy Pena is a question mark. He's been hot and cold throughout his brief major league career, and the pitching is, you can definitely look at the pitching and see it being enough to drive them to the division title, but while Valdez is solid, Hunter Brown started really bad last year and then got really good. If he continues being the guy he was the last 4 months, that's great. Ronel Blanco came out of nowhere, and he may ultimately step back into there as he tries to prove that for a longer period of time. Maybe Lance McCullers shows up in 2025. Who knows? Anything could happen. But I think that there's a lot of middling spots on that team, and I see them as being, a notable tick below where the Rangers are in that division.